Welcome to For the Road. In the last episode, I mentioned that this car was not in such great shape, and some of that was down to me abusing it and using it in ways it was never designed to be used. Some of that was down to improper maintenance, and a lot of it was down to things I could have done better the first time I rebuilt this car. So, before we start the rebuild on this, I want to document everything on this car that's wrong. And we're going to have to start with the bodywork, because that's taken most of the brunt. So let's start with the bodywork, that's the most obvious. All over this car there's all sorts of little dings and scrapes, like this hyperextension damage where I let the door fly open going around a corner. Whoops. Here you can see it's chipped on the back of the door, and that's because the hinge is failing, which is extremely common on these Alfa 105 coupes, because the doors are so long and the hinges are so small. Up front, there is this bubbling and cracking quite sort of all the way around the front of the car. And that's because this car was in a front end ding and not really repaired properly, and it's got lots of filler in it, and filler doesn't really take the stress of the chassis flexing quite that well. So that's a bit of a problem. Yeah, on this side you can see there's also a little bit of hyperextension damage. Nothing to worry about though. A little bit of paint and that'll be fine. Here you can see I've got the paint starting to peel off and showing this car's red paint that was under that I resprayed blue very, very cheaply a couple of years ago. In this rear corner, this is probably where the worst body damage is. Somebody hit this car in the middle of the night when I was in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt, and they put a big dent in this fender, and I was able to knock it out just with my sort of fist from the inside of the boot, but it did leave all these creases all the way down to the bottom of the fuel filler cap, and the fuel filler cap doesn't really close properly because it's bent because of that incident. But apart from that, this is actually a very, very good body shell, rust free, except for this spot on the driver's side rear wheel arch. When I was in Ethiopia, some kids were throwing stones at the car and they managed to crack the windshield. That was a bit upsetting. These windshields are pretty difficult to get here in South Africa, and it took me months to get this one. And because of a couple minutes of boredom, this one was ruined. It's a bit annoying. The rest of the glass is all the factory glass though, and it's all in good shape. The rear windshield's still good. These are not the correct quarter window surrounds. The proper Sprint GT ones don't have a cutout at the top here. They're sort of chrome brass with a sharp corner on the edge here. These are stainless steel, but I've got the original ones somewhere. I just need to have them fixed up. The wheels on this car are really, really nice. I got these from Classic Alfa. These are their TZ1 Giulia Super TI wheels. I quite like them. They're a nice sort of alternative to the GTA style wheel. This wheel, I'm ashamed to admit, I have curbed. I curbed it when I lived in Cape Town. If you've lived in Cape Town, you know how easy it is to curb a wheel. I was really rushed, trying to get my car as far over as I could one day so a truck could get up the street where I worked, and I let it touch there. So that's a bummer. These wheels are going to have to be repainted. The interior of this car has aged pretty well. If you open the door, the first thing you'll see is the seal has popped out, and that's because this door has sagged because of the bad hinges. It knocks it out every time you shut the door. So you can see that's not gonna stay in with those bad hinges. In here it's actually all pretty nice. There's not much work to be done in here. The carpets have not worn well. There's no sort of pad where your feet go in the driver's side, so that's worn through. The heat has had an effect. Well, the heat of the desert has had an effect on some of the stuff, like this. The column shroud is cracked. The vinyl's coming off the gear lever surround. Some of the vinyl's lifting off the top of the dashboard. But apart from that, the interior stayed really, really neat and tidy. I built the electrical system for this car myself, and it seems to have survived pretty well. There are a few things that don't work, like the number plate lights, because this wire has come off completely, so that doesn't work. It doesn't spark against the body or anything, so that's fine. The taillights still work. All the indicators still work. The headlights are good. The spotlights work. However, I stupidly put a bulb in here that was too high wattage, and you can see how it's melted the plastic. Even now, it's actually sticky. Ew. Ow, it's hot. Right. One thing that can be tricky on these cars are the gauges can be difficult to get working. But all these work properly. So if you start the car, there we go. So the electrical system's pretty in good shape. The fan on the radiator exploded in the traffic in Cape Town, so that switch doesn't do anything. This is for the spotlights. This is for the extra power points for laptops and phones and things like that. Yeah, everything's in pretty good shape. The heater does not work currently, and it's stuck on. It's stuck on hot. The fan doesn't work. That's fine for the winter, but in the summer it's pretty unpleasant. Let's have a look under the hood. Yeah, so this is the 1600 engine that I built for this car. Unfortunately, it's really not in very good shape. There are a combination of things that have led to this engine being quite badly damaged, but you can hear one of them now. Yeah, that's a pretty aggressive air leak on the inlet manifold. It's on the #1 cylinder. And it's actually not between the carburetor and the inlet manifold, it's actually between the inlet manifold and the head, which is pretty unusual for these cars to go there. But that's unfortunate, but it's going to have to be done when the whole engine's done. One of the biggest problems I had with this engine was detonation or pinging on the bad fuel up in Africa and the heat and everything. I think a lot of that was down to the fact that I built an engine that was too high compression for dealing with African fuel, but there are a whole bunch of things that come into play. It's sort of like cams and the timing and the anti-reversion steps in the inlet manifold and the exhaust manifold, carburetor jetting. There's a whole bunch of stuff that made this engine pretty difficult to run on bad quality fuel, and now I'm really worried that the pistons are burnt and it's got burnt valves, or I think it's definitely down on compression, and some of that is down to also the fact that these spark plug threads, like 3 out of 4 of them stripped while I was on the trip, and that was in Europe in the cold. So I don't think the spark plugs are even sealing that well at the moment. Part of the reason this was so difficult to start a moment ago is because these carburetors are flooding quite badly. I'm not sure if it's a problem with the pressure regulator that's down here next to the distributor, or if it's a problem with the floats in the carbs or the needles and seats or something. I don't know, I haven't really checked. It starts sort of on the turn of the button when it's cold, which it shouldn't without a choke. And when it's hot, it just spins and spins and spins until it eventually catches on one cylinder and then goes. It's really not tuned up very well at the moment. Another thing under the hood, you can see the effect that my time in Norway and Denmark and Germany and the Netherlands in the winter has had on this car. The salt that just got everywhere. It's made everything dull, and it's corroded everything. If you look down here, everything's just a little bit rusty, and this engine just used to be pristine and perfect and everything looked brand new, but you see how all the little nuts and bolts, everything's just rusting. All the hose clamps, it's just the brake booster, everything's gone. Speaking about the brakes, that's part of this car that I'm really not very happy with at the moment. this reservoir leaks quite badly, and you can see how the brake fluids damage the paint in the engine bay where it drips down. I need to have this replaced. It's running Dunlop brakes on the front, which are not great if I'm honest, but at the back it's running a 2-litre 4.1 limited slip with Arte brakes, and the Arte brakes are great, but that 4.1 limited slip does not work with a 1600 engine. It just does. The 1600 just doesn't have the torque to pull it up hills and things like that, and the fact that this engine's quite badly damaged doesn't help. One of the worst things on this car is the exhaust. It is in really poor shape. It rattles around, it knocks, it touches the diff, it fills the car up with exhaust gases. Somewhere around here is where most of the exhaust gases actually come out. Listen to that. Really shocking. These transmissions in these Alfa 105s can be very notorious for grinding into second gear. This one is in fantastic shape because I found an old Alfa gearbox with really low miles on it with original synchro meshes, and I used those when I built this, and then I ran the red line oil built for these cars, and I'll say this will shift into second gear at 0 degrees, freezing cold on a winter's morning with no problem, and it feels great. You can shift it really quickly once you get going. I'm really happy with this transmission. So apart from the terrible bodywork, the awful paint, the rust damage from all the salt in Europe, the destroyed engine, the brakes that don't work, I quite like this car. So I'm going to rebuild it and get it into really tip-top condition, have it as a really fun vintage long-distance rally car that we'll use for all sorts of cool stuff. It's going to be a long time before this is finished, but stay tuned on For the Road and you'll see the whole build start to finish.